G'day guys, Chris Dorry here. Today I'm going to look at whether I could single-handedly replace a club's recruiting department. So this idea was inspired by Pie for Life, who posted this comment on Big Footy. So Pie for Life, for those that aren't aware, is Peter Williams of AFL Draft Central, who was their founder and creator. So basically the idea came from the concept of, over the years I've created a thread on the Collingwood board on Big Footy called Night Sight v Hindsight v Hindsight, where basically I go through the players I would have picked at each of Collingwood's selections. We've got who Collingwood picked, and then going back sort of, I guess, years into the future, we'll sort of look at, okay, so in hindsight, who was actually the best player at each of these picks, and who would have been the optimal choices. So, yeah, I guess looking at this and sort of seeing, I guess, where would I rate myself compared to the, I guess, 18 clubs, it was sort of an interesting one where, in having a think about the topic, I was thinking, well, if you extend the years out far enough, just because there's going to be so many players that I really rate that go undrafted year after year after year, because I have my own unique draft board, and a lot of the players that I really rate don't get drafted in their draft year, my expectation naturally would be that all 18 clubs would outperform me. But the results in this test are quite interesting. So yeah, what I'm going to do today is look at basically who Gold Coast took and who I took, and I'm going to do the same with Greater Western Sydney. So to see, firstly, is it possible for one individual, such as myself, who I haven't been part of any club recruiting circles, so I haven't been part of Clubland, and yeah, I'm basically seeing, can I outperform one or maybe even two AFL clubs? And I thought, look, given these are expansion clubs, these are probably the best opportunities to outperform. And my suspicion is, and you'll find this will come out through these draft attempts, is particularly in the early years, it's much easier for me to have an advantage over these expansion clubs, just because they're new clubs, they're getting a heap of under 18 prospects in, and you'll find if you look through a lot of the other clubs that, particularly in those early parts of the draft, that it's actually those players that were picked by the other clubs tended on average to outperform Gold Coast and GWS with their early picks, particularly from those earliest years. So that is somewhat helpful for me, but yeah, it's an interesting exercise to see, is it possible, firstly, for someone like me as one individual to outperform a whole club just based on my power rankings. So to explain what you're looking at here. So in the left-hand column, you've got Gold Coast, all the players that they took from their beginning. And then we've got in brackets where I rated each of these players in my power rankings. So, and what I've also done is I've bolded basically the key, I guess, prominent, really good unique players, or at least somewhat good unique players. Whereas, say, if I like David Swallow, Gold Coast likes David Swallow, I'm not going to bother highlighting them as sort of, I guess, players of difference, to put it that way. And then you've got on the right-hand side, you've got basically, these are all the players I would have picked at each of Gold Coast picks. The first set of brackets that you'll see, that's where I rated the player. And then the second set of brackets is, of course, where they were actually drafted. So I'll start with 2009. So this was actually the first year that I started covering the juniors. So yeah, let's see how I went. So in 2009, so of course this is when Gold Coast were beginning. And Danny Stanley is the one I'd identify. Given he had a few productive years in his early days, look, I'm going to bold him and say, look, he was a success on some levels. So I'll give Gold Coast credit there. And then to go through the players I picked, so Miles Sewell, the brother of Brad, he was absolutely dominant through the VFL. He's one of those guys I just wish had an opportunity. Michael Barlow, I really liked. He obviously went a few selections later to Freo in the rookie draft, and that was a really good pick. So, yeah, I'm happy with that. Andrew Hooper, look, he was a small sort of back pocket, could sort of push up through the midfield a bit. Was drafted, but ultimately delisted after a few years. Kyle Hardigan, he was someone where he was actually drafted quite a few years later and became a success as a key defender. So that was a good call on my part. And then, of course, you've got Sam Miles, who is a common player in both categories. So for 2009, I would consider particularly Barlow to be clearly the best of these, and I'd even say Hardigan's better than Stanley. So given that look, at least for 2009, I'd give myself the edge. But let's see how things go from there. Is it possible I outperform Gold Coast? Let's see. So now we're on to 2010. So again, David Swallow, common player. He was the consensus number one. Harley Bennell was a different one, and I actually rated him as low as 10. So I was worried particularly about the off-field things that I was hearing. And I probably underestimated him on talent early. And look, in terms of what he did early on, he was thoroughly deserving of the number 2 pick. But then from there, after those successful early years, he ran into injuries, off-field issues. So unfortunately, really, that firstly stalled his career, then ended his career prematurely, unfortunately. So look, in hindsight, you wouldn't say he's worth pick 2, but certainly early days, it didn't look good for me at least. So Josh Caddy, look, I rated him a bit lower, but he did have that one really strong season with Richmond where he was going at about 2 goals a game. But yeah, look, otherwise probably hasn't really lived up to certainly that pick 7 billing. And then Dion Prestia, this was the really good pick by Gold Coast, I feel, where I really badly underrated him at 38. So at the time I was thinking, look, his stocky build is a sub 180, not sure how much upside he's got, even though he does sort of have that power ball winning. But yeah, in the end, look, fantastic pick and really just out of the blocks, sensational. So yeah, that was an early lesson for me, and really looking at guys who can ultimately play and not looking too much into that sort of upside sort of component, and really sort of accepting, okay, if they can win the footy and they can do a few things, yeah, they can translate well. So that was an early lesson there for me. On my side, though, for 2010, and I'd consider this a reasonably successful draft, and this was really the first year that I was fully in from the very start of the year, really following the juniors closely. So Jared Pollock was a first point of difference for me, so I rated him, and look, he's been great in terms of the meters gained and what he's done on the outside over the years. Dyson Heppel, really happy to have picked him, and this one reflects really positively on me, both not only his leadership contributions more recently with Essendon, but both whether it's as a mid, putting him in defence. Yeah, just really he's one of the very best players from this draft. So yeah, I'm certainly happy in hindsight securing him there. Ben Jacobs, obviously with his first club not successful, so but then made a move, became a really good tagger, and became a capable piece. So I'll give him acknowledgement there. But of course, sort of he's had his sort of injuries that have really, I guess, prematurely ended his career, unfortunately for him. And Luke Parker, this is one I was particularly happy with. And he was one where I just looked at as, look, this guy can play. He's a top 20 pick. Dropping to 40 is really a bargain. And in the end, that proved right. So yeah, just had the tools from really the ball winning, the marking, could kick a few goals, and just translated beautifully to AFL level. So again, Miles Sewell, I really liked what he was doing in the VFL, so I'll mention him there. Ed Curnow, yeah, look, ultimately he was someone where he started out his career with Adelaide. I think he had the 1 year with them as a rookie, then delisted. But then, yeah, really through the state leagues, really played good footy. And as you can see here, so RD, so that refers to, well, he was pick 18 in the rookie draft. So, but yeah, based on my power rankings, he was considered best available here. And obviously in hindsight, he's far exceeded expectation to even still now be going and playing good footy. So yeah, obviously terrific selection for Carlton. And then we've got Ben Brown. So in his draft year 2010, I was saying, because he got hurt that year, that he was on talent, a first round talent, and he's someone where you absolutely have to have him on your draft board and you have to draft this guy. So, and you'll see with a few of these where, for me, it really helps because a lot of these guys that I really like do get undrafted. So if there's sort of a few years into the future, you'll find that some of these guys that I really liked in their draft year that went undrafted, they've actually gone on later to have success. So yeah, if we look at 2010 and sort of determine which is the winning side, given I've got Parker, Heppel, they're clearly the best two out of them, and with Brown as well, Curnow, Pollock, I'm really happy with my side. So for 2010, I'd also consider my selections to be better than what Gold Coast took during that particular year. Okay, so on to 2011. So, of course, in the mini draft, there's a commonality there. I would have taken O'Meara as well. But the one success for 2011, and Gold Coast should be really happy with this one, Aaron Hall. So for a number of years, really throughout his Gold Coast tenure, I'd even say, he was one of their most important pieces. So just really on the outside, an absolute difference maker. Just the one guy on their team that could actually move the footy, had the speed, had the kick. And look, why I had him outside my top 80 was I'd seen footage and he was really exciting, but I just hadn't seen those full games to have the confidence to actually sort of say, hey, this is someone I'd have on my draft board. So, yeah, ultimately sort of it's disappointing in that respect. But look, I'm not the closest Tasmanian junior football watcher, or for that matter, in the case of Hall, a senior football watcher. So, yeah, so that was really the one success if you go through the names there for Gold Coast. And you can also see a bit of a flavour here where you've got a couple mature ages, so that's always good. And then you've got McWalter, obviously, who was recycled. So we've got a commonality of Sexton, so he was a zone pick, so he was always going to join. But where I differ, so Waylon Manson, I just want to mention this guy. So for those that saw him, or at least what he was doing at this time, this guy was an absolute machine. So some people that might have watched The Recruit might be familiar with Waylon Manson. But yeah, what he was doing, so in the Waffle Colts, just having a few games, really played good footy, but then he moved to the Northern Territory to play some games, and he played alongside Brendan Favola. And just seeing those two in the front half was ridiculous. Both of them together, collectively, could get 10 goals a game each. So, and just in terms of what he did aerially, marking everything, just really just a natural, instinctive footballer that had game and had the production as well. So, young talent, I was really high on him. And look, with a Manson, my approach would have been, if I had another pick, let's say inside the top 50, I would have used that. I wouldn't have needed to use 24. But yeah, look, given the selections that Gold Coast had, yeah, look, I wouldn't have risked at the time waiting till 80, because as you can see by this rating of 7, I just rated him so highly, I had to naturally use this high selection on him. So, yeah, but of course, had he been drafted, would he have been able to cope with being in a professional AFL environment? Look, possibly not, but at least on talent, I was exceptionally high on him. I thought he was really the most talented in that draft, basically. So, yeah, such was my thought at the time. So, yeah, so going through notables. So, Hayden Sloyth, so he was picked in the rookie draft, as you can see here, at 26, and that was to Fremantle. But I really liked him. So this was his original draft year, and just seeing what he was doing as a forward, I thought this guy's an absolute beauty. So maybe a Mark Lacroix, that was sort of what I was thinking back at that time. So, and you might actually see a reoccurring theme after he was delisted by Fremantle. He's one where, and look, you'll see a lot of reoccurring names where I'll actually repick guys year after year after year. So, yeah, that is certainly something to watch for. But yeah, Sleuth is one I've always been a huge fan of, and I've loved in more recent years what he's done in the Waffle. But yeah, Ben Brown again. So again, went undrafted, and you can see he was then drafted in 2013. And then Jack Crisp is probably the other notable one here. So why I could justify having Jai Bolton, who I rated one spot higher than Crisp, is with Bolton, well, he was delisted from Collingwood's rookie list after the 1 year. There was no interest known in him, so given that, I could put aside my final pick and go a bit earlier on Crisp. So that's how I approach drafts, and you'll see this throughout as a theme. So again, if we look through the 2011 season, so really the key players, again, are the ones bolded. They're the key differences. So you've got Brown and Crisp versus Hall. I'll take the 2 for 1. So Crisp, you could even say possibly Brown and Crisp had probably had slightly the better careers, but look, doesn't matter who had the better. I would take any 2 over just any one from these 3. So, yeah, again, for 2011, I come out on top. And ultimately, what I'm going to say as well in defense of both Gold Coast and GWS, and you'll see it really through these early years, I've got a particular advantage. And again, it comes back to you've got all these 18-year-olds. So it's not on the recruiters, basically. So you can't just fully blame the recruiters, because there's all these variables in the puzzle that really contribute towards the actual eventual outcomes as to whether these guys develop or not. So that'll be a point I'll continue to sort of stress throughout. So then looking at 2012. So no major hits if you look through Gold Coast lists. So this was obviously a draft that really didn't help them at the end of the day. And again, that's disappointing because you got Jack Martin at 1 in the mini draft. But if you look through the key names that have been drafted with those first picks, so whether it's a Swallow, whether it's an O'Meara, whether it's a Jack Martin, these guys were looked at as generational talents and by far and away the best in their pools. And yet we're not really looking at them as the superstars that maybe could have been. So, and really it's just so hard to develop on a list such as a Gold Coast or a GWS in those initial years, just because they don't have the chemistry within the group, those veteran leaders, the established players. There's just so many pieces missing where it's just so hard to really develop with these sort of clubs. So, yeah. So, yeah, really, there's no notables there for 2012. On my side, there are, though. So, the first one and the obvious one is Brodie Grundy. So, every day of the week, I would be taking Grundy. And you can see here, I rated him as the 5th best in the 2012 draft. So, and I could have seen it as perfectly reasonable for people to have rated him at even as high as 2 or 3 in this draft. That's how good he was. But, yeah, look, the reasons for his drop, I guess there were a lot of clubs that really didn't need a ruck. But further to that as well, we had a number of years really before this draft where we had ruckman just taken far too early. So, the year before we had Billy Longer as a top 10 pick. He just had a whole host of those sorts of guys where, look, they just went too early ultimately. So based on that, we had Grundy probably, I guess clubs probably overtuned the other way and really tried to, drop ruckman down in their calculations, really just because there were so many rookie successes. You could trade for ruckman cheap and you can still do these things and get a great deal of success. So, yeah, there's some of the key factors. And look, with the Gold Coast and Greater Western Sydney, they were the two clubs that a Grundy made a lot of sense for and they're big misses. But from what I was hearing around Grundy sort of in the interview process, he wasn't too keen to join either club from what I was understanding at the time, at least, where he wanted to go to really an established club that really he could get the most out of his game at. So that was sort of how he was sort of mentally thinking about things as I understand it at that time. So, but yeah, obviously he's one of the best in that draft, so fantastic. And the other key player, so Tip and Woody is the other one. So Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody. So undrafted until 2015. So, but I really liked him in 2012, where whether it's that sort of tackling energy, pressure, excitement, he's just one of those guys where even then he just made things happen. So, and as you can see with this rating of 33, I thought he was a good piece. So, and I was actually a bit surprised that he actually didn't get picked. So, but yeah, look, oftentimes you get those smaller types who go undrafted, and clearly with the case of McDonald, Tip and Woody, that was a huge mistake. So, yeah, so again, 2012, I come out pretty convincingly on top, it's fair to say, with no one meaningful selected by Gold Coast on their side. Okay, so 2013. So we've got Lemons was really, I guess, the main successful one where, look, he's still around and he's a role player. He's adequate without being exceptional. And look, Collar Jasny I could give sort of a bolding acknowledgement of where, look, he had a bit of early career success, but with injuries, concussions, look, that ended his career prematurely. If not for that, maybe we'd be sort of seeing him favourably to a Blake Acres, I suspect. But look, given Acres is still around and look, he's sort of been able to continue, I'd say probably Acres is favourable, but really I did go a bit early on Acres, just sort of feeling there was a bit more upside than there was. So, mistake on my part and something I've learnt from. Matt Crouch, he was one I was really high on. You can see with a rating of 9, really happy with that pick in hindsight as possibly one of, if not the best available at that pick. And then we've got Lewis Taylor. So he was the rising star in that draft, from that draft pool. So, but he hasn't really kicked on and improved and continued as expected. So that's one of the things I watch with the smaller guys, where if you're a smaller mid and you're that sort of 175-ish or sometimes less, often you don't get that same development because often they're just so much more physically advanced and they've grown into their body, they know their bodies, so it's often harder for them to improve as much. So I do sort of include that a little bit into my equation. And one other player I'd like to mention as well, who I'm disappointed never got another shot, is actually Mitch Thorpe. So what he was doing in Tasmania, and I did actually intentionally watch a bit of tape on him because I was hearing rave reviews, and he was playing some really good footy, and just his leadership from everything I was hearing was sensational. So he's one I really would have liked to have seen receive another opportunity at AFL level, and I think clubs actually sort of missed an opportunity there by not taking him. But yeah, 2013 in summary, look, Crouch is clearly the best of those. Yeah, and look, having the 3-1, it's pretty clear that 2013 I won out again. So, and as I was saying earlier on, in these earlier years, you can expect the outcomes really to go quite a bit more convincingly in my direction. Just because, again, they're new clubs, it's hard for these guys to develop on Gold Coast list. So that's something as a key point I really hope sort of comes across pretty strongly in this video. 2014. So this was a better draft for Gold Coast in hindsight, and they did really well. So Tuke Miller, so sensational, and seeing what he did in this past year is just, I didn't see that coming, it's fair to say. So yeah, he's developed into one of the really good midfielders in the comp. He's in that sort of top 10 midfielder in the competition discussion now, so that's sensational. And then Adam Saad, well, as a mature age recruit at the time, well, yeah, look, he's become one of the elite sort of rebounding defenders in the comp, and really even for Gold Coast he was before moving. So yeah, he's really been up there. So from 2014, I would say straight away, Gold Coast have taken the two best. So to look at some of the ones that I took, just as a point of interest, you've got Laverde, who only really last year became a pretty consistent and capable player for Essendon after shifting into defence. That's worked out really quite well in the end. So yeah, that's one at least in hindsight I'm happy with. Peter Wright, of course, is a commonality, and Reece McKenzie. So I had him at 5, but he was someone where I was hearing leading up to the draft, he's not going to go inside the top 50. So given that, it's pretty easy to sort of say, okay, I've got pick 29, I should get him here. So that was my approach there with this one. But yeah, looking at the others, so what I am happy about in hindsight with this 2014 draft is I've actually got Mason Cox and Connor McKenna. So USA and Ireland. So this is, I think, actually the only draft I've ever had international players inside my top 50 power rankings, but I was really bullish on what I'd seen and heard of Mason Cox, and same with what I'd seen and heard of McKenna as well. So that's why they were both included in the power rankings. But for the purposes of this exercise, look, given they're international players, really they can basically negotiate with and talk to whichever clubs they want. And I'm not going to make the assumption if I was the Gold Coast recruiter that I would have successfully been able to convince Mason Cox or Connor McKenna to sign with my team. So given that, the guys I would have here would be, you've got Nick Newman and you've got Brett Turner, who never got picked. So Newman, of course, has been somewhat successful as a rebounding defender, so I'm reasonably happy with that. And the other one that's interesting, so you've got Brett Eddy, who ended up getting drafted a few years later, and I wouldn't have minded seeing him get a shot earlier, but Garrett McDonough, so here's another where, again, undrafted, and really not until actually last year's draft. So, of course, now he's with Essendon, so yeah, let's see how he goes. But even in 2014, I was sort of saying, hey, this guy, he's up there with Caleb Daniel and Jaden Short as one of the 3 premier kicks in this draft. So, yeah, look, I, as you can see, had him in my power rankings, and the guy is the best available pick I would have picked here. So, it's unfortunate he hasn't had a shot at AFL level till now, but I'm really excited to see what he's going to do. So, look, even though I've got more players on my side for 2014, it's pretty clear that Gold Coast have the 2 best. So 2014 is a clear win as a result for Gold Coast. Okay, 2015. So the notable players here, so you've got Archie, well, he's moved to Brisbane, so we'll see how he goes there. Whether he can sort of become, over the long run, that sort of, I guess, long-term best 22 piece. I'm not yet convinced, but maybe he can be that. At least showed some signs sort of year 1. Fiorini, look, he's always been productive, but it's just about really becoming that long-term, again, best 22 player and really proving that. And then you've got McPherson, who really just had that one good year. So, yeah, there's still question marks around each of Gold Coast picks for 2015. Yes, that was all they had. And then on my side, so I would have been aggressive with bids. So again, on a best available basis, Ben Keys, Brisbane Academy, I would have bid. He would have gotten matched. Matthew Kennedy, GWS Academy, I rated him, would have bid. They would have matched. And then Eric Hipwood. So again, I would have made the bid, but again, Brisbane would have matched. So and then from there, well, who would have been my next best available? And as you can see, so number 10. So it's not really necessarily the guy you would have most wanted. But yeah, look, Mitch Hibberd, I thought was a pretty good piece at that time coming out of Tassie. So an interesting fact. So obviously he was drafted, then delisted, but then did really well in the VFL, transitioning to become more of a mid. But then, yeah, of course, just had that 1 year and then delisted again at AFL levels. So yeah, look, unfortunately hasn't been able to quite catch on, but yeah, look, he's still become an okay enough player, even if he's not AFL caliber necessarily. And then looking at the other ones, so Tom Phillips, overager, really liked what he was doing, so I had him in my power rankings, and again, best available. Michael Hartley, as a mature ager, I felt pretty comfortable with here, as again, best available. And you'll see with all the selections, really, I'll go a best available basis, but if I can drag one of my players back to ensure I get the maximized draft hand that I can, that's my approach throughout. So, and then you've got Nathan Broad. So again, mature ager, it's been a good defender for Richmond. So, yeah, so which draft would I take? Well, yeah, I'd be taking myself in 2015 as the better of the two drafts. Just having those more pieces and those more, I guess, certain pieces where they've actually proven they're good at AFL level versus guys who are a bit more speculative. But look, pretty close to line ball, not a whole lot in it at least. So Gold Coast didn't embarrass themselves. It's just the players they haven't really developed to expectation. And on that theme as well, so for 2016, so I guess the one different successful player, to put it that way, is Jack Scrimshaw. And of course with Gold Coast, well, Gold Coast weren't picking him, but it took a move to Hawthorn for him to eventually become a successful piece. And now is really a very useful footballer. So yeah, credit to him for developing, credit to Hawthorn for obviously getting such a good amount out of him, really, ultimately. So yeah, so that's sort of how that can work sometimes. What I would have done here, so you've got Will Setterfield, GWS Academy, I would have bid on. Ben Aidsworth, so same picks. And then you've got Harry Perryman, who I would have bid on. Again, GWS would have matched. So, and then from there, Will Brodie was, again, my preferred. And look, you've got here, obviously, the Suns took him there. But where I do differ is at pick 9, I would have taken Willem Drew. So, yeah, I was a huge fan of him, it's fair to say, in his draft year. So 2016, of course, was my first year writing for ESPN, and pretty much every week I'd find myself just really talking about this guy, where, look, he was just playing really good footy every week. So, and just really that sort of Jack Viney level aggression from his tackling to his ball winning, had the height, but without necessarily being this strong hulking guy. So, yeah, I just really liked the way he played. So, given that, I thought he was a top 10 talent, and I've been really impressed, particularly in the last year, what he's done, particularly on the defensive side. He's been a real difference maker, so I've got a great deal of respect for what he's doing, and I think he's a terrific footballer, ultimately. And then the other success on my side, so you've got, I'll go back to Jack Bowes. So Jack Bowes, obviously commonality, and again, just academy player, would have matched bids, and we've got Shear, who I would have matched bids on. And as you can see with this ranking, I really rated him, but again, just another story of, look, Gold Coast couldn't develop him. So, and you'll see that quite a bit through these rankings. So yeah, Ben Ronk was the other one. Had a few good games early in his career. Hasn't really developed. So I'm not too confident on his long-term prospects at the moment. So he really needs to elevate his game. So 2016, it depends on really if you're a Drew fan or if you're a Scrimshaw fan. I like them both. I like Drew more. So I'd give myself 2016, but yeah, I'm sure some Hawthorn fans would say, look, Gold Coast had the better 2016. So up to you and your preferences, but yeah, Drew I really, really like as a mid. And and that's not being down on Scrimshaw. I respect his game very much. He's a best 22 player on any team also. It's fair to say. Okay, so 2017. So we've got Will Powell. So he's one, as you can see by my ranking here. I didn't rate him. And look, I didn't know a whole lot about him at this time. So I'm not even sure if I had him in my Phantom draft. If I did, I would have had him probably quite late in my Phantom draft. So, yeah, look, obviously he's developed into a terrific player. And what he did last year, particularly, credit to him, is really become a sensational piece for the Suns. So, Ballard we've got here as a commonality, so great pick by the Suns. So that's 2 for 2. So really good value with both of those picks, honestly. And the other one I would say with the Suns that was a success was Nick Holman. So, yeah, look, he's been a capable piece without being huge for the Suns. And then on my side, so Noah Bolter. So as you can see by my ranking of 6, I rated him hugely higher than where he was picked. Just on talent, just he had everything, and as you can see at AFL level, he has everything, and he's sort of learnt pretty well how to sort of put it together. Unfortunately, last year, obviously, he was hurt, but yeah, I still think he's one of the best young key position players in the comp, so he'd be one of the first players I'd pretty much start a team with. That's how high I am on Noah Bolter. So, yeah, fingers crossed he's sort of healthy ongoing for the rest of his career and really fulfills his potential, because he's an incredible talent. And yeah, I'm actually, even if you put him forward, actually just seeing that glimpse of him forward the other year in a final, just shades of Tony Lockett, I was thinking even. So yeah, it's fair to say I'm a big Noah Bolter fan. And then you've got Jordan Butts. So rated him top 20, as you can see, and of course he went undrafted. So he was actually picked up the next year as a rookie by Adelaide for a bit of history there. So yeah, and this won't be the first time that I rate a key position player in the top 20 and they go undrafted in their draft year, but then get drafted the next year. So, yeah, I usually go fairly well with my key position selections. Cassidy Parish, so for a bit of trivia, so younger brother of Darcy, taller than his brother and a good ball-winning mid, but just probably lacked those other dimensions at the end of the day. So, yeah, he was never selected. Charlie Thompson, so yeah, he's a really good VFL footballer for those that don't watch much VFL. So you can play him whether it's midfield, across half forward. Incredible leader, and I love how he works hard both ways. So he has the endurance, but yeah, just in terms of his defensive run, just how hard he works on that side of the ball is... When I was watching him, particularly in the juniors, I was saying that's the best defensive run I've seen in terms of his leadership talk on the field. Again, in those categories, best I've ever seen. So... it's a shame he's never had a shot at AFL level, and it's really a travesty he hasn't to date. But yeah, hopefully at some stage in the future he gets a chance, because look, he's someone I think could actually catch on and really sort of stick around on an AFL list and become a piece. Even if he's just a role player versus a key piece, I think he can potentially be a good contributor. And for a Gold Coast as well, really looking for those young leaders, those guys who talk out on the field, that work really hard defensively. I think he would have been a terrific fit for the Suns at that stage. And then you've got Hayden Sloth, so a favourite name. And of course in 2017, Tim Kelly, of course, won the Sandover medal as the Waffles best. Tim Kelly, I should say, was drafted in 2017. So his pick, I think it was 24 to Geelong. But Hayden Sloth on the same team was actually the Sandover medalist. And yeah, he was ultimately the better player on that team. So both of them really had that ability both through the midfield and forward, but Sloth even on a higher level. So yeah, he's obviously got all the ball-winning accumulation capabilities, but he's got the skills on a high level, hits the scoreboard. So... and if you look at what Tim Kelly was doing in his first year, well, Hayden Sloth would have had that sort of impact at AFL levels. So, yeah, it's just tragic no one really has given him another chance from this point in his career, because in my opinion, he's not only an any team best 22 player at AFL level, but even someone who could have been a difference maker for a club. So, yeah, look, it's just one of those things where clubs overlook a lot of those mature ages, particularly when they hit their mid to late 20s. So, yeah, it's a blind spot that, yeah, hopefully clubs become more aware is a blind spot. But, yeah, going back to which was the better draft, whether I won out or whether the Suns won out, I'll back myself for 2017. I think Noah Bolter is the better of the players drafted here. Will Powell I really respect, so I don't have him too far behind, and Jordan Butts as well. I'm really respecting what he's doing, and for a bit of background as well on what Butts was doing in 2017, He led the TAC Cup in marks taken, and he was the youngest in that draft pool, so a December 31 birthday. So doing those sort of things, look, it's a travesty that he wasn't drafted. One knock I would have had on him at the time was, look, he's pretty low impact per possession, and you don't really notice him. He doesn't necessarily stand out. So I believe that's sort of a lot of why he wasn't picked. But yeah, look, ultimately at the end of the day, he's become a capable piece for Adelaide. And to his credit as well, he's really developed as a shutdown player. He didn't have those capabilities in the under-18s, but that's a side of his game that's developed tremendously. So yeah, big credit there, it's fair to say. Okay, so 2018. So, of course, I had Lukosius and Rankin 1 and 2. And again, this just comes back to Gold Coast not having that established core of really good players to allow these guys to develop. So you've got less turnover, guys wanting to leave. There's just never been that recipe to enable guys to maximize their development for the Suns. So yeah, it's just really a shame that these guys haven't sort of been able to elevate their games to that, whether it's a Sam Walsh, Bailey Smith, Zach Butters sort of level. So, but yeah, of course, where things differ. So Ben King to the Suns, obviously a terrific pick. So can't knock that. And on my side, I've got a pick where I'd argue is just as good. So Bailey Smith. So yeah, he's one of the really sensational midfielders, it's fair to say, from this draft. And yeah, what he was doing in last year's finals was just ridiculous. So yeah, you'd love either player on your team, basically, it's fair to say. And then moving on from there, so McLennan, he's still around. Not sure if he'll be around much longer, but we'll have to see. Hopefully, for his sake, he develops. And then you've got Graham as well, where, look, he's received some games. Maybe he develops. We'll have to see there. For my other picks, you've got McFadden I would have bid on, but of course he would have been matched by Brisbane. You've got Riley West, and again, as a father-son, the Dogs would have matched him. So I would have ended up with Luke Valenti. So he's just recently retired, obviously, for injury reasons. So yeah, it's unfortunate we never got to see him at AFL level in the end, because yeah, he's one where yeah, he would have potentially been quite a good piece for Freo through the midfield. So yeah, it's just something we'll never get to see. And then you've got Sydney Stack. So I rated him at 22. There were even times during the year I rated him inside my top 20. But yeah, of course, in the preseason supplemental period, well, yeah, that's when he ended up being picked up. So overlooked during, of course, the national draft and the rookie draft. But yeah, the preseason supplemental period, Richmond were savvy enough, of course, to give Stack a chance. And yeah, in that first year in particular, really impressed. So yeah, he just needs to keep applying himself because he's a really good talent. And interestingly, for those that weren't aware with Stack, what I saw of him during the under-18 champs that year, just through the midfield, how he read the taps, just how good he was in traffic, I was thinking, yeah, this guy's going to be an incredible midfielder in the long run. So I'd actually like to see Richmond give him some midfield opportunities, honestly, if he keeps working at his game, building his tank. But yeah, also what he's done, obviously, in defence, a little bit up forward too. He's been a really good piece too. So he gives you a great deal of optionality. So Stack is a really valuable player if he keeps applying himself and keeps improving. So yeah, look, the winning side, hard to say. For me, it's just a shame a lot of these rookies didn't get a chance, and you'll see a lot of this where I'll have all these players undrafted where I'm just so high on them and I really wish they got chances at AFL level. So Mitch Pajaski, he's going great in the VFL. So he's that tall ball-winning mid who can go forward, take a grab, hit the scoreboard. Someone give him a chance. Mitch Grigg, what he did in 2018, he was a beast in terms of what he did as a ball winner, has that long penetrating damaging kick, but then he'd hit the scoreboard as well. So I think he was going for almost 2 goals a game as a mid. So yeah, what Mitch Grigg was doing in 2018 was plainly put AFL caliber. No doubt about it in my mind. But of course, more recently has really let himself go and is not in the sort of shape where he's nearly AFL caliber. But look, had he been picked up then at the end of 2018, yeah, he could have really been a piece had he, of course, kept applying himself. So Mitch Maguire, I thought he was going pretty well in the NEAFL. But yeah, he hasn't really quite sort of taken those next steps to become AFL caliber. You've got Jai Bolton, who is going to be a repeating player where, look, what he was doing in the Waffle, same story with Sloith with the next selection. they're guys where you just have to be drafting them. They're just that good on such a level that, yeah, they're just best 22 any team in the comp level. So Bolton is a mid, Sloth is that mid forward. So yeah, if I could get credit for a lot of these rookies, I'd love it because they're great in the state leagues. But of course, for the purposes of this, we're really just looking at who are the better AFL players. So for 2018, I'd have to give it to the Suns. Where King, look, generally people would say, look, there's a greater scarcity to key forwards, so you'd lean towards King if you had to take one or the other, particularly with some sort of queries around sort of Smith's mental health as well. Doesn't help. And then from there, look, do you want a Graham and McLean combo or do you want Stack? Hard to say. I'd probably go Stack. So, oh, look, it's hard to say. It's pretty much a draw. But yeah, look, if King's the number one player, maybe you'd go that side. But yeah, 2018 is really a toss-up. But yeah, for me personally, at least, I'd really love this 2018 draft just because of all these rookies. So, yeah. So I'd probably give myself 2018, actually, just with the rookies being so good, at least in my opinion. But yeah, you guys can call it at home if you like. 2019. So you've got similarities through the first 4 picks. So I should say mid-season draft, Sam Lowson. I really liked what he was doing in the first half of that year, just as a really talented forward. He could have potentially been a piece, but yeah, you've got basically Rowell, Anderson, Flanders, Sharp. I rated each of them best available picks, so I was at this draft really saying, hey, well done Gold Coast, you've drafted phenomenally. And I thought really the same in 2018 as well. They drafted really well too. So it's not like Gold Coast can't draft. It's just, yeah, obviously there's other components to it that really impede on the development of a lot of these guys. But yeah, moving on to, I guess, the players of difference. Actually, I'll go back and say, so Sam Flanders, so I had him at 4 in my rankings. So basically that year, so he was playing alongside Caleb Sarong, and he was as good as Caleb Sarong. So that's just one example into how, I guess, the club you land at can really make a significant difference. So, and with Flanders as well, what he did in the finals, and this was in a match against Rowell and Anderson, he had a quarter where he absolutely blew them away, was clearly the best afield in that sort of patch of the game, and that clearly dominant player on the field. So, yeah, obviously he was really a piece in the juniors, but yeah, just the Suns haven't really been able to kick his game into gear. So that's been a part of that. But yeah, Jai Farah is probably the one that's the player of difference that is a success here for the Suns. So I would have gone Budrick as well. So that's the other one I would have copied with, where, of course, I would have done the same. Just being academy. But yeah, look, yeah, Farah is having some success with the Suns, so that's a help. And on my side, Shooty, I would have liked to have seen him get a shot at AFL level. He's been doing pretty well in the Sandful reserves, getting some league opportunities and looking pretty composed and capable there. So if he keeps developing, maybe we see him at some point. Angus Baker, you'll see as a repeated player for me, where, look, he's an AFL caliber rebounding and intercepting defender. So as that roughly 190, 191, he's a really good piece that can just fit into a defense really easily. Ben Sokol, I've never seen a medium-sized forward mark as strongly as he does. And he's one where, had he been drafted to AFL level really in his draft year or at any stage, I feel like he could have become something like a Dane Swan-esque sort of midfielder, where, look, it'd be a poor man's version, but having that same sort of midfield ability and then sort of getting forward, taking marks, I think he could have been potentially a piece. So, what he did in this year as well, he was just absolutely dominating. So 2019, what he was doing in the waffle was sensational. So he just could have been really that sort of, I guess, third marking option up forward, maybe something like a Tim Membry equivalent, if you're looking at something similar at that sort of size. So I think he could have been potentially a piece. Jai Bolton, again, yeah, look, keeps getting undrafted, and I'll keep putting his name forward. Basically as someone who, look, is AFL caliber, and he should be on an AFL list. So, yeah, look, for 2019, look, Farah's the 1 point of difference. So given that, you'll no doubt give Gold Coast the points. But yeah, look, I haven't given up on Baker getting an opportunity. He was almost picked up a few times. Mid-season draft, he was considered. Pre-season supplemental period, he was considered. in the last year. So, yeah, hopefully he ends up getting a shot because I really respect his game. And even seeing how he transitioned. So, initially he came from the knee full. He was going for 30 disposals a game up there off half back. And then he comes to the VFL and he played great footy in defence as well in the VFL. So, yeah, he's absolutely someone where I think he could just fit in so well in defence. So, in my own way, I still sort of like what I did in 2019. But, yeah, look, given Farah's actually on a list, Gold Coast can get the points for 2019, albeit barely. 2020, so the main difference here, you've got Reece Nichols. So it was really, I guess, you've just got really one player, then you've got a heap of rookies ultimately. So no major involvement, so there's really nothing much to it. But the problem I do have with a lot of these selections, as you can see, you've got all these recycled players where that's just ridiculous. That doesn't help you, I guess, find best 22 players. And of course, they're all sort of gone. So there really shouldn't be surprises there. Nichols remains, but is he going to be a best 22 player long term? Probably not, would be the expectation. Yeah, and so of similarities. So we've obviously got Elijah Holland's commonality. I really liked him, so as you can see, the fourth player. So again, early in the national draft, I've got a lot of sort of, I guess, common opinions with the Suns. So yeah, so rookie draft, I would have taken Jackson Callow here, and I would have been over the moon. I thought he was the 20th best in the 2020 draft. So, and of course, he went undrafted, and then mid-season draft, Hawthorn was savvy enough to pick him at 17. So, hopefully, he gets some opportunities there. Other players of interest, Sam Fisher, he had an incredible year in the Waffle as a mature ager. Xavier Ma, he was unlucky to not get picked in 2020, and mid-season draft he was on the radar, same in the preseason supplemental period. He was really quite firmly in the mix and discussed. And the other notable, I'd say probably here as well, is Max Pescud, where I really liked what he did in 2020, and then even this year in the VFL, I really liked the glimpses that we saw of him. He's been a really talented forward, but he was showing a bit more up the field as well. So he's one I would have liked to have seen picked, but yeah, it's just another story of another talented guy who didn't get a shot. Pre-listed, Davies and Jeffrey. As you can see by my rankings, I rated them, and of course I would have senior listed them. And then you've got Ace as well, who, as a Cat B rookie, look, I was obviously watching him in the juniors, and I thought really he had talent just with what he did in terms of pressuring players. I thought was in particular that really sort of strong component to his game as a forward. So yeah, I would have certainly Cat B rookied him as well. So yeah, look, which side gets the points? It's too early to say. Does Nichols become a player? I'm skeptical, but we'll have to see. And then Jackson Callow, look, I think he's got a better chance, certainly, and I think he could become a best 22 player. Whether it's forward, whether it's back, we'll have to see what Hawthorn have in mind. But yeah, hopefully that works out and he becomes a piece. So yeah, look, with a lot of these undrafted players still sort of going pretty well, you've got a Pescud in the state league, Fisher in the state leagues. Yeah, look, obviously I prefer what I did in 2020, but yeah, you can call it a tie if you want, given, of course, no games out of Nichols or Callow, respectively, to date. And then 2021. So, of course, it's just happened, but just as a, I guess, point of interest. So, Ned Moyle, I actually really respect this pick by the Suns. I thought they did really well picking him at 5. I thought, look, he's got a chance to be a long-term ruckman, honestly. And that was sort of my same feeling with Jackson Callow, but as a key position player. So, pick either of them. I don't think you can really go far wrong. So, I can really respect that pick. And then the differences in the national draft. So you've got Mac Andrew. He's a tall unicorn, basically. So really exciting piece. We'll have to see how he comes along and if the Suns can get the most out of him. Fingers crossed they can. Josh Ward, another Hawthorn player, funnily enough. So credit to Hawthorn. And you've also got Ned Long, I should mention as well, who is another Hawk who they took as a rookie. So yeah, there's a bit of agreeableness with what Hawthorn were doing, it's fair to say, for 2021. So yeah, but with Ward, look, I just thought, gee, this guy's a really good midfielder. He's the best Victorian midfielder aside from Dacos in last year's draft. So yeah, look, I had to really sort of give him respect, and look, he's the best available, so I can't not take him there. Ditmar, unlucky to get undrafted. he's been in the conversation for the preseason supplemental period, but if he doesn't get picked up, I look forward to continue tracking him in the waffle and seeing what he does this year. So I have a lot of respect there. Charlie Constable, so he's one I actually liked in his draft year, and I respect what he's been doing in the VFL for Geelong. So obviously hasn't really been receiving many opportunities. So hopefully with the Suns he gets those opportunities, because if he does, look, he's got the chance to be a good piece. And then the other player that is a commonality. So Bodhi Yuland, look, the Suns could just sort of straight draft him as a academy prospect who, as I've got here, was pre-listed, but I thought he's a top 20 talent, and watch out for him. People won't know his name yet, but people really need to get to know his name and be aware for when he actually does debut, because this guy's an exciting footballer. So he's one of those guys where he's just got that power, he's got that strength, he can really impact games heavily, whether it's through the midfield, forward, back, you name it. There's just really something to him where he just really sticks out. So watch Yuland and watch him really impact games heavily. And I'd say the same of Ditmar as well, actually, just in terms of that contested side, that tackling, that pressure. Just has a real liveliness around him, around the ball. So, I'm optimistic he can potentially get a shot at AFL level at some point. And I really like these three mature ages I picked as well. So, Bailey Rogers, what he does in the waffle, he's absolutely sensational. So, he won the Sandover medal last year, and for me, he's in that sort of Hayden Sloyth type conversation where you put him through the midfield, you put him forward. He is clear-cut any team best 22, no exceptions. So that's how high I am on Rogers, and I really hope he keeps working on his game. And it'd be great if he was picked up during the preseason supplemental period, but if not, he'll be right on my radar during the mid-season draft, it's fair to say. Blake Slenslog, I loved what he did in the first half of the year as a key defender. Didn't like him as a key forward. But again, he's one where I'd love to see him get another shot at AFL level. Of course, had that brief stint with Geelong for 1 or 2 years, and of course was cut there as formerly a Category B rookie. But really like sort of the development, that year-on-year improvement. I think he's got the potential to be a piece, and I'll continue watching him. But I hope for his sake he returns to be a key defender, because that's where he can really play good footy, just because he reads it so well. That's his special sauce there. And again, I've got Angus Baker, where again, I'll probably for a number of years into the future keep putting his name forward as someone who is an AFL quality general defender. So, So again, as per every year, really, I'm always pretty confident in the players that I'm picking. But of course, we'll have to see, obviously, in hindsight, how that goes. So as a point of interest, so I've created best 22s for both my group and Gold Coast groups. So I'll let you look through those names in your own time if you like. I'll just have it up on screen for long enough where you can capture it if you desire. But basically, for me at least, I feel whether it's looking at the defence, looking at the front half, looking at the midfield, looking at the depth on the bench and through the emergencies, I feel my group is quite a bit stronger than the group Gold Coast took. And again, I really want to stress the point. So obviously with Gold Coast, you've got a whole recruiting department. So it's not like the people who were part of Gold Coast recruiting department over the years, and you've obviously had different staff over the years, but I'm not calling them out and saying, oh, they're all terrible. I don't believe that to be the case. It's just with drafting, there are so many variables that take place where it makes it possible for one individual such as myself to outperform a Gold Coast, where, look, if they don't have the culture right, they don't have the right coaching staff, fitness staff, you name it, from veteran leaders, having those key established players, that group that's been together for a number of years has chemistry within their group. If you don't have all those components, well, it's going to be really hard if you're bringing in a lot of 18-year-olds at the same time and really just going so heavy in the draft in all these young players. It's just too hard. And then if you're just bringing in all these really rubbish depth players, whether it's through trade, whether it's through rookie picks late in the draft, it just doesn't help you. So, and as a result, that really enabled me to, in my opinion at least, outperform Gold Coast over that span of years. And you really have to step back and look over a period of really 10 plus years, ideally. The more years, the better in terms of the sample size to really, I guess, make a key finding. So, and then what I did at the end was I did a combined best 22 just as something for a bit of fun. So Yeah, so basically the underlined are the ones that are unique to my team and the ones that I would have picked. The ones with the cross through them, of course, the ones that are unique to those that Gold Coast picked. And then the italics, of course, are the ones that, of course, both myself and Gold Coast drafted. So, and you'll see a lot of the commonalities with those are those that particularly went early most of the time. So whether it's mini draft one, pick one, pick one, pick two, a first round pick, Bose Academy. So you have a lot of that. And then really Ballard was the only other really, I guess, more unique commonality where just so happened that both Gold Coast and I really rated him, and as it turns out, rightly. So, yeah, as it turns out, Peter, well, apparently I can keep up with AFL clubs on my own, which honestly I didn't expect, given my assumption really going into this exercise was actually I'd probably lose out, just because I know there's always going to be a lot of players that on my side of the ledger go undrafted. So you'll learn something new every day. But moving on to GWS. So basically, I wanted to really put myself against two clubs. Gold Coast, I thought if I was going to beat a club, I'd be a better chance against. GWS, look, having sort of gone through the Gold Coast part, I thought, look, maybe I've got a chance against GWS. So, yeah, let's see what happens. So, in the 2010 rookie draft, so of course this was before GWS had their AFL team, the key players of interest, I guess you could say, for GWS. So you've got Andrew Phillips. So I also rated him, and I would have, funnily enough, taken him with the exact same pick as it worked out just by going down my power rankings. And the other ones that I'd like to give some special mention to. So John Giles, I could probably bold him, honestly, as someone where I respect what he did at least for a few of those early years where he played some pretty good footy and showed some early signs. But yeah, look, after that, never really sort of took those next steps, unfortunately. But yes, that sort of combo ruck forward, I do have some respect for what he was doing, so I want to give him some credit. And Steve Clifton, so really good state leaguer for quite a long time, but unfortunately with GWS he just never really got those opportunities. But I want to give GWS and their recruiters some credit for that pick also. And then on my side, so again, Miles Sewell, I absolutely loved him at this time. I thought, yeah, look, is someone where he just should be on an AFL list. Ed Curnow, again, I really liked what he was doing and thought he was certainly AFL caliber, as I've mentioned before. And then again, Ben Brown. So for me, clear best available at this point by a long shot. So yeah, just the fact that it took so long for him to get drafted was just was just one of those things where it was bang the head against the wall sort of stuff. It's just, how did he last that long and not get drafted for all those years? And then Kyle Hardigan. So he was one I liked for a few years, kept going undrafted, but again in 2010, and I just kept talking about him really every year until he got drafted. So it's just one of those where, look, late in the draft as a rookie, I would have been pretty comfortable had I needed a key defender taking him. So yeah, so for 2010, who won out? Look, I've got clearly the two best in Curnow and Ben Brown in whatever order you'd like. Ben Brown probably is the top of those, but yeah, and then you've got Hardigan, who's outlasted Giles. So yeah, 2010 I very clearly win out, it's fair to say. And again, as with the Gold Coast examples, if you remember back, well, with Gold Coast, in those early years, I absolutely demolished Gold Coast. So maybe if I'm winning some of the early years with GWS, maybe you should expect over time GWS to be making ground, if not beating me in those later years, would be something you should watch out for. So okay, so 2011. So again, I bolded the unique ones. So you've got Patton, Canelio, Tyson, commonalities, that's fine. But we've got a lot of uniques here. So Hoskin Elliott, just didn't rate him that highly. Just couldn't win his own ball, couldn't find enough of it, had the endurance, could take a grab, but yeah, I just didn't think that would translate, and it sort of worked out correctly. Buntine, I saw him as sort of a, I don't know, he could intercept a little bit, but couldn't do enough other things. So I thought it was a bit early for him. Haynes is an overager. I thought, look, he's 1 year older and he's not that exceptional. But yeah, look, he's one that I've really learnt from that, yeah, if you're an elite interceptor, hey, you're AFL caliber, and that's something you really need to look heavily for and weight very heavily into your calculations when looking at those taller defenders, those 190 pluses. So yeah, with a Haynes, that's something I've certainly learnt from. Tomlinson, look, he had a stretch of years where he was a very good piece, so the Giants did perfectly reasonably there. And then with these three, I'm really disappointed with my performance, and they're ones I've really learnt a lot from. So, Toby Green, at this time he was actually a midfielder rather than a forward, for those that didn't follow him as a junior. But yeah, just had that aggression, that ball winning. He just had everything, and I was just thinking, look, he's a short midfielder, doesn't, as I was thinking at the time, didn't really have the points of difference. Well, I was looking at the wrong points of difference at the end of the day, where when you've got that aggression, that ball winning, that hardness, you translate easily. And it's really blindingly obvious with Green, of course, that he's an incredible footballer. So, yeah, he was one that I really learned a lot from. Same story with Taylor Adams, really good ball winner. Again, I was thinking, look, he's probably a bit vanilla. So, and I've really come to learn the value, particularly through this draft, as the year I really learnt the value of guys who can really just win the contested ball at a very high level. So, and then you've got a Devon Smith, where again, having him outside the top 60, well, in hindsight, that's silly. And that's just a case of, again, I was just looking at him as a small, where I just didn't really see that special sauce with him. So, again, it's one of those where I've come to learn really to take production into account and not make that same mistake of really overlooking guys who are just such good footballers and really just putting too much focus into the attributes. I've really toned that down quite a lot over the years, as those that follow me would probably have picked up on, I'd say. And then also we've got as another interesting one, so Sam Frost. So really good as a rookie pick, getting him at 1. So he's really become, not even though it hasn't been with GWS, he's really become that long-term piece. So yeah, good pick there. Obviously wasn't quite my pick there as the best available, but I also rated him, so I can't sort of get down on myself too much for that. Okay, so looking at my side of the equation and the differences. So Chad Wingard. So this was one where I just thought he's absolutely sensational. So I thought this top 3 is a clear top 3. And Wingard, particularly what he did early days with Port Adelaide, was just ridiculous. So both forward and midfield, just an impact player. So yeah, ultimately really happy with that one. Kavanagh, I'd like to make special mention of. He hasn't become sort of a piece, but this was a really good learning experience for me, where I really bought into a narrative far too much, and I've really learned not to do that as much. So over the years we've had, whether it's a Joel Selwood, Chris Judd, those sorts of guys having all these sort of injury queries coming into their draft year, and then really far outperforming their draft positions. So I was really thinking with Kavanagh, where, look, he came back from injury, didn't look exceptional, but I thought, look, given sort of, I guess, what he'd done in years past, he's going to be a star. And I just bought into that narrative far too much. And of course, yeah, that was a really key learning for me, it's fair to say. So yeah, never again with that mistake. And I've really come to learn as a result to really look at the guys who show that year-on-year progression. So that's something where more and more that's a key that I talk about with the draft prospects. So I don't care as much about what they were doing as 15, 16-year-olds. To me, that's irrelevant. I really want to see, okay, at what rate are they improving? Because that's the best indicator of what their actual upside is versus attributes, which is what really I was assuming at this time, talking to too many other scouts who had that, I guess, incorrect assumption around upside. You've got Tom Mitchell, so I would have bid on him, but of course he would have been matched, so that's irrelevant. So therefore I would have taken John Patton here. So, and probably lucky I would have, or he wouldn't have been coming to GWS under my scenario. So, but yeah, really at that time I was a bit unsure about, I guess, those bigger bodied key forwards. Just really wasn't sort of sure around their development as much as I probably should have been. And look, in the end, as it's worked out, it's probably actually quite a good position to have had Patton. But yeah, look, injuries have gotten in his way and really hurt him. So he would have been a much better player if not for all the injuries over the years. So, and you'll see the next year I over-adjust probably in putting Tom Boyd as the top pick. But yeah, moving on at 7. So I really rated Jared Witts, but the disclaimer is he was a New South Wales scholarship player, so Collingwood could just get him with their last pick under the rules at the time. So given that, I would have taken Brad McKenzie. So, and he's become a really good piece in the Sandful. So always been an exceptional kick, and he's become a really good player there. So maybe a touch off AFL caliber, but yeah, look, not far off. So Yeah, I've still got some respect for his game, even if he hasn't made it at AFL level. Brandon Ellis obviously racks up the footy. Enough said there. Sometimes empty possessions, but yeah, look, I'm obviously not upset with that selection. Sam Doherty struggled with Brisbane, but obviously with Carlton came into his own. So, and it just seemed that homesickness at the end of the day. But yeah, he's obviously become fantastic. Seb Ross had a number of years there for the Saints where he was a really good midfielder. He's dropped off since, but yeah, he had those sensational years. Again, we've got Hayden Sloth as one of my favourites here. So, and I've also got Waylon Manson here, who I should also mention. So, as I said in the Gold Coast part earlier, had there been a pick that was sort of a bit later on that was still inside the top 50, I would have been comfortable. Let's say I had a pick in the 30s. Let's say I would have taken Manson here, I would have taken Manson in the 30s. But given in GWS's circumstance, that wasn't the case. And I was worried sort of from pick onwards that he might get picked up. Given I rated Manson this highly, pick 14 was the spot I had to take Manson. And of course, I wouldn't be picking him around, say, this sort of area, just for the simple reason that, well, there wasn't the interest in him that high. So, yeah, really with Manson, that would have been my approach as a result, just to go through that sort of component. And then you've got Ben Brown, of course, who, again, I was the most avid supporter of, really, in the online community, it's fair to say. So, yeah, so to look at which side of the ledger's better, pretty even. I'd be inclined to give the points to the Giants, though. For me, if I had to say who's the best, I'd be going Green. And I've got a great deal of respect for both Haynes and Adams as well, particularly. So, on my side, though, I still really like the pieces, whether it's getting Wingard, Doherty, and then Ben Brown as well here. Just, yeah, they're really good picks for me. So I'm certainly not disappointed, but if you said to GWS, hey, which group of selections would you take? I'm sure the Giants would take that same group again, no doubt about it. So, and I'd agree with them, by the way. Okay, so 2012. So you've got Whitfield as a commonality, although I would have bid on Joe Danaher, but then, of course, would have been matched. So nothing really there to that. With picks 2 and 3, I thought these were awful selections, and I was very vocal in saying that at the time. So O'Rourke, I rated the 9th best. Plowman, I rated the 14th best. And really, frankly, particularly O'Rourke, I should have, in hindsight, had even lower than I did. But yeah, with O'Rourke, look, he just wasn't that big of an accumulator. Didn't really have that contested side on that high level. So, but yeah, just needed to find more of the footy. So yeah, I didn't get sucked in there. And Plowman, look, I was just sort of thinking, look, he's not quite tall enough to be a key defender. He's just really a good third tall without being a superstar, as I was sort of thinking at the time. And I was probably right there. Christian Jacks, I rated a bit lower. He really didn't turn out to be anything in the end, just didn't develop. Core, Stewart, look, at least they're still around. Core, sort of the better of the two. But I'm not sort of sad in missing either of them. And then Zach Williams, who I actually liked, as you can see by my ranking of 44, and this is late in the rookie draft. But yeah, I would have certainly liked to have had him, but he just wasn't quite the best available on my board, so I couldn't quite justify picking him ahead of others. So given that, yeah, that's the case there. But yeah, Williams was the one that's for me at least, the really impressive pick here for the Giants. On my side, so I've gone through Danaher and Whitfield. Jimmy Tompkins, I'd like to give special mention to, where he was one of those players where I just learned a really key and valuable lesson here. So, and what that was is, again, contested ball is king. So really damaging on the outside, had the kick, had the run, so he could really generate drive. He could find the footy as well, but just really allergic to winning his own ball. So, and that's really a lesson I've really learned, it's fair to say, over the years. So, yeah, I certainly wouldn't be having Tompkins anywhere near the top 5 at the end of the day. If I was approached with a similar sort of prospect in game these days. So, yeah, you need to always keep learning is a fundamental that I hope to also have come across in this video. Jack McRae, really obviously very happy with him at this pick. Just on a historic level of accumulation and ball winning. So really happy with that. Brody Grundy, again, same story. Getting him at 12, like you could tell by my ranking of him at 5, just I'd be absolutely ecstatic to get him there. So for me, this is a sensational draft, and really, in terms of those early picks, the draft I've really nailed it more than really just about any other draft, it's fair to say. Jack Viney, I would have certainly bid on, but he would have been matched. So given that, Tom Cleary would have been my pick, and he's become a long-term piece. We'll have to see whether he holds his spot sort of over the next few years for power. I do worry that with Sam Skinner added that he won't be as relevant necessarily from this point going forward. Dale Garlett, I could have probably mentioned before. I had him both in the Gold Coast example and then here as well. But yeah, basically I rated him on talent. I wasn't actually expecting him to go undrafted, but I was aware of the off-field issues. So, but yeah, that's the way it worked out. Obviously picked the next year in 2013 by Hawthorn, and then yeah, just obviously sort of had his off-field issues and it didn't work out there. But yeah, the successes for me, if I keep going down, so you've got, again, Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody. I rated him in 2012, even though he was eventually picked in 2015. So, again, really happy getting him there. And then Tom Langdon. So he was actually drafted the next year, but in his draft year of 2012, I really rated him even then. So, yeah, look, given that, he made that cut. So for 2012, I really annihilate GWS, it's fair to say, with these selections. So, yeah, not much more can be said. Just because, yeah, look, when you've got the likes of, if you can have a draft where you can bring in Whitfield, McRae, Grundy, Tip and Woody, Langdon, and Cleary as well, hey, that's really like one of those all-time great sort of level drafts. So, yeah, so that's a big win on my side of the ledger. 2013. So you've got Kelly, you've got McCarthy, you've got Lobb. So that's pretty good. Kelly, this was a big learning lesson for me. So with Kelly, I was really looking at him as a junior. And again, I was just too stuck on it this time. Look, he's just probably a bit vanilla, where he's got the endurance, clean skills, can rack it up and can win a bit of his ball without being that uber elite level contested ball winner. But yeah, I just thought really you need tricks. So I was still sort of getting caught up in that narrative a bit at this time in sort of when I was looking at talent. So yeah, I've certainly learned over the years to really look at things very differently from that perspective. So McCarthy had some early years in his career where he went pretty well with GWS, but yeah, they just had too many key forwards, and look, unfortunately, he hasn't sort of been able to keep it up and really keep at it and be a success in the long run. And Lobb's been pretty successful, probably overpaid to be fair, but yeah, look, he's still been a good piece and obviously a contested marking force. So as that sort of relieving ruck, look, he's a good piece in that sort of role where he's capable enough. And then on my side, so obviously Boyd is the commonality here, but Akers, I rated him here, so that's just obviously far too high, having him at 2. You've got Matt Crouch, who I had at 9, and then you've got Dumont at 17. So, yeah, look, I don't mind this group. Crouch is really the big win on my side of things, and even Dumont, I'd say I really like here as well, and he had a few good years for North Melbourne, but yeah, look, which side is the winning side? I guess you've got 3 existing versus 2. And look, obviously Dumont was delisted and Akers isn't necessarily that regular best 22. So if I could go one side or the other, I'd be going certainly GWS, because Kelly I'd pick over Crouch. And then I'd prefer certainly Lobb over either Akers or Dumont if I could. So yeah, I'd be pretty comfortable with GWS for 2013. But I'd like to give some special mention to the other players here that you probably at home won't necessarily all be aware of. So Lloyd Paris, so he was a New South Wales zone. He went rookie draft. So, but I rated him as the 20th best in this draft. So I really respected his game, but yeah, unfortunately didn't develop. Mitch Thorpe, again, I mentioned him before. Loved what he was doing in Tasmania. And I thought really he was stiff not to get that next opportunity after that success he was having. And then you've got James Battersby, who, again, another story where he got drafted at least, but then got delisted after, I think it was even just the 1 year with Adelaide. If not, it was certainly within 2. And then he's really become a success in the Sandful and become, yeah, really a very good player at that level. So Not sure necessarily he gets another AFL opportunity given his age, but yeah, look, you never say never, and he's certainly exceptional at that level. So that was by no means a miss on my part, or at least certainly not a bad one. So there's low margin of error there. So yeah, that was a win for GWS, I was saying. 2014. So yeah, so Marchbank, reasonable here without being exceptional. And then Finlayson was a good value pick as academy. And look, I like the value here, but again, he wasn't quite best available. So he'd be more someone I would have said, look, given there's others I prefer, I'd prefer to take a Finlayson as a rookie, personally. So Ahern, look, he had sort of moments there, but just injuries hurt him in the end. And Jack Steele was a commonality, obviously, through the GWS Academy, so that was one I was pretty happy with. And again, I had him at 13, so as an overager, I thought he was exceptional and a year one ready mid, but unfortunately with GWS, just with that glut of midfielders, just didn't really get those opportunities. And of course, had he stayed, well, he'd be probably GWS's best midfielder. So he's certainly, in my opinion, better than any midfielder GWS has existing at the moment. So... but yeah, moving on to my group. So I would have bid on Darcy Moore. Of course, he would have been matched by Collingwood. So kind of Blakely. So in hindsight, this is far too early to pay for him. But yeah, I was probably at this time sort of getting a bit sucked into the upside of tall midfielders, it's fair to say. So yeah, that's why I probably blundered that. But look, I'd still pick him at least over Pickett in hindsight, with Pickett sort of having injuries, never really developing, talented as he was. Peter Wright, I quite liked him, and honestly, I still do. I actually quite liked what I saw from him last year for Essendon. He had some big games, so yeah, there's still scope for him to honestly be a long-term piece. And then Jake Lever, this is the difference maker that really moves it quite heavily in my favour, it's fair to say, as a draft. So yeah, 2014 is a clear win for me. But going through the other name very quickly that's of particular interest, so Reece McKenzie. So I rated him as the 6th best in the draft, but of course he went at pick 77. So not having another pick until 89, well, of course, I wouldn't have waited that long. I wouldn't have risked him not being there, but I wouldn't need to, of course, use, say, a pick 6 or a pick 7 on a Reece McKenzie. Just really being pretty confident heading into the draft, just hearing a lot of rumblings about sort of personal troubles with him that, look, he's not going certainly inside the top 30. So given that, I could be very confident picking him at 24. So yeah, basically, yeah, Lever's the difference there. And yeah, the Giants would certainly love to have him, that's for sure. 2015. So, and this is probably the point again where I'd be sort of saying you'd be expecting GWS to start getting on top of me from here. So let's see if they do, given they've sort of now had those few years. And you've got obviously the likes of Shane Mumford, a Heath Shaw on board at this time, and GWS are becoming a more successful and solid team, it's fair to say. So with the academy picks, you can see by my ratings here, I really liked both of them. Both Hopper and Kennedy, I thought they were both terrific in their draft year. So Hopper, I actually rated one spot ahead of Clayton Oliver, who was my number 2. So for those interested there in who would have been that first live pick that I liked in this draft. But yeah, of course, we've got Himmelberg there, Flynn, so very boring draft, all academy picks during the national draft. So GWS really just played to script there. And then they just redrafted Reed and Lloyd. So they didn't really need much of a recruiting department in 2015, it's fair to say. All they needed to do was really follow the younger kids. But yeah, for me, how I would have differed from the approach by the Giants. So Hopper and Kennedy, of course, I would have picked. Ben Keys, I would have bid on. As you can see by my rating of 5, I really rated him. And then you've got Mitch Hibberd, who I would have taken, who I spoke about in the Gold Coast segment. And then here at 41, I really liked Blake Hardwick. I thought he's a really good piece. So, and he's, to his credit, really developed for Hawthorn, and on a level I certainly didn't expect. But that's credit to Hawthorn with their player development, which, for me at least over the last at least 10 years, has been by far and away the best in the comp, by far and away. So even just developing guys who can't kick into really good kicks. So I haven't seen that from certainly any other clubs, it's fair to say. So yeah, who wins out for 2015? Well, as you can see with all the bolded Giants, well, given at least these guys have had shots at AFL level and been productive players, that's the side. And look, I could make an argument that maybe Hardwick is possibly the better of these players and the one I'd probably prefer to have if I could have any one. But if you're having the opportunity to have maybe a Himmelberg, a Flynn, they're both guys where, look, they're reasonable respectively. And then Reed and Lloyd, again, they've been reasonable pieces without being exceptional. So, yeah, look, given the additional players, I'd be certainly awarding 2015 to the Giants. Okay, 2016. So again, this was my first year with ESPN, so it's interesting to look at some of the players here. So in 2016, so Hugh McLuggage I had as my number one player, so I would have been absolutely ecstatic taking him here. And of course, the Giants went with Taranto, who honestly I really underrated, and it's not for the reasons you'd think. So in actually watching him on the field, I sort of pretty consistently thought he's actually probably a touch better than McGrath. But then I was just hearing some things from other scouts, parents, where it just made me sort of reduce his spot on my board. And I've really learned over time just to really, I guess, not listen to the noise, not listen to what others are saying. And yeah, so that was one where, look, I probably should have had Taranto honestly at 2. And had I really stuck with my instincts, that would have been a more correct decision. But of course, in this case, it wouldn't have mattered. I preferred McLuggage. And in hindsight, I'd also still take McLuggage for the record, where what he does is probably a bit more rare, a bit more uncommon. So you just don't really have too many players on the outside who are that good versus Taranto, where there's quite a few more who, as midfielders, can do a lot more of the things he can do. But Taranto, I actually really liked as a junior, both as a mid and a forward. So I'm actually surprised he hasn't developed more as a forward than he has. So that's something hopefully he incorporates more into his game over the coming years. Setterfield, again, commonality. You can see with my rating of 3 for him, I really liked him. So, and again, you've got Perryman. Harry Cumming, I wasn't as high on, but to his credit in the last year, he's really developed very well. So, yeah, he's become a piece and looks like he'll be a long-term best 22 for the Giants. Tiziani, that was a commonality. And then you've got De Boer, who was actually quite a savvy pick as a tagger and had a number of successful years for the Giants. So I certainly can't hate on that pick. Pat Full, look, he was a shadow of who he was certainly for Brisbane, but at least he had sort of a few years where he was a component, so that was something. And you've got Stein and Sproul, who still obviously are components on the Giants list. For me, where I differed, so yeah, 20. So obviously, Cumming I wouldn't have matched, but Willem Drew was my pick there. Where, yeah, look, I would have been pretty confident going to this draft that Drew would be available at 20. I thought he'd probably go around that sort of 30 to 50 range was sort of what I was thinking, which was about right in the end. So, yeah, picking him up at 20, I'd be ecstatic. And yeah, just always had a lot of faith in his scope to develop, basically, and as you can sort of see by that rating of him at 9. So again, as I mentioned already, just loved sort of the way he played the game, just so aggressive, so physical, just really sort of, he's like that sort of taller Jack Viney, basically, the way he was playing even at that age. So yeah, just really liked what he brought to the table, and pairing up with McLuggage as well, who they're obviously teammates in the juniors, so that's always a positive, certainly when you're an interstate club, having that sort of dynamic in play. And then Kobe Much, so academy player. Of course, the Giants didn't pick him up, but he was still drafted, but hasn't unfortunately had success. And then Tiziani I've mentioned as another I would have matched on there. So, okay. So, yeah, then we've got Ben Ronk again, who had those good sort of first few games at AFL level without sort of, at least to date, really proving that he's that long-term best 22 guy. So we'll have to see there. So, look, better draft for 2016. So I prefer McLuggage to Taranto. If I had to pick a third best, I'd be going Drew, certainly. But yeah, Cumming and De Boer, look, they're certainly respectable. It's hard to pick between the two. I'd pick certainly my group for 2016, but people would be certainly valid in sort of saying, hey, GWS's group has got more sort of numbers. So we'll have to see how certainly Cumming goes, and we'll have to sort of see how Stein and Sproul go. So Yeah, we'll have to see, but you could call it a tie if you want to at home, but I just prefer my group having the, I guess, best and third best, as I rate them at least. 2017, so as you can see, a lot of bolded players, so you've still got a lot of guys who are still AFL listed. So Bonner obviously is with North Melbourne now, hasn't really developed to the level expected, and he's another of those where he was an early bloomer, had the injuries in the lead up sort of to him being drafted, so yeah, that's always hard. But yeah, just sort of one of those guys where he was just always so big and strong that you just can't really expect that same rate of development from. So I thought that was a reach, and it's probably worked out that way in the end. Brett Daniels, yeah, look, maybe he's a long-term piece. He's played, obviously, for the Giants, but yeah, he's one of those where I'd almost say I'd prefer to have someone better on my team if I could. And sort of same story with Langdon, who's obviously now sort of switched clubs. And then Taylor. So this is the difference-making pick and really the great one for the Giants. And honestly, if you said to me if I could have one key defender in the comp, who would I take? I'd probably be saying to you Sam Taylor if it's like for the long term, for the rest of their career. If I could have that, then I'd probably be saying Taylor's the guy I'd be taking. So yeah, great deal of respect for his game, and I should have honestly rated him quite a bit higher. And then, of course, you've got Reed again, and you've got Jack Buckley as a Cat B rookie. And look, I'm not going to give myself credit for Cat B rookies unless I was actually really sort of closely watching them as juniors and would have sort of said to the other recruiting staff, hey, this is someone I really would have wanted as a Cat B rookie. Okay, so Darcy Fogarty. So here's one where sort of that year out from when he was drafted, he was playing really great footy, but then in his draft year, he was quite disappointing. So always had that sort of man-child build, but yeah, didn't show that rate of development. So Fogarty is another of those where it's really sort of allowed me to sort of adjust my viewpoint towards not being as high on those that are necessarily so physically developed and haven't shown that rate of year-on-year improvement. So yeah, for me, that's really a learning. So, look, Fogarty could still make the grade and be a good piece, but yeah, look, he just hasn't really sort of developed as I've hoped, and he isn't all that much better, if at all, really, from when he was first drafted. So, yeah, fingers crossed he can turn things around, and if things work well, maybe he can become something like a Jake Stringer. That would be really the ultimate outcome, but yeah, I'm not all that optimistic at this stage. He really needs to prove that he can find more of the footy and become, even though he's influential, high impact per possession, it just hasn't really sort of worked into something ultimately at the end of the day. As yet, at least. Charlie Constable, so I liked him in his draft year. You can see it by my rating of 14. So tall midfielder, could rack it up, win the footy, good skills. You could even put him across half back. That was roughly my scouting report from 2017. So yeah, basically I respected his game, and it's unfortunate Geelong just haven't really been able to give him those opportunities. Harrison Petty, who's really come on in the last year for Melbourne, and he's looking like a long-term piece potentially there. So yeah, I can't be too upset by that. And then again, Jordan Butts, as per with Gold Coast, again, rated him a top 20 player, undrafted, and then rookied the next year. So you've got that story. And then again, I already mentioned the Gold Coast part with Parrish, Thompson, and Sloyth. So you'll see a lot of the same names reoccurring, particularly as you get deeper into the draft. So, but yeah, obviously the better 2017 has to be GWS with Sam Taylor. So clearly the best of all these players. I'm sure no one will disagree with me there. So you'd have to take the Giants group from 2017. But nonetheless, I'm still fairly happy with this group, where particularly Butts I'm particularly happy with. Petty I'm fine with. And look, even these later picks, I know they haven't sort of gotten redrafted, but I still don't mind those at all, even if they haven't been, because I still sort of respect what they've done, and what Thompson's done since has still been fine, and Sloyth has still continued and played fantastic football, it's fair to say. Okay, so 2018. So you should start to see by now that, look, GWS are picking better, and I'm basically getting a lot of undrafted guys where clubs aren't really seeing eye to eye with me, it's fair to say. So rightly or wrongly, we'll have to find out in hindsight. So, but as you can see from a lot of the earlier years, a lot of the guys that went undrafted actually did get picked up years later because they can play, but clubs just didn't ultimately recognise them in their draft years. So So you've got 2018. So Jake Caldwell, commonality. I thought he was the best available. So enough said there. Jackson Haley, I didn't hate this pick from the Giants either, honestly, but I did prefer Riley Collier-Dawkins. And both interestingly stand in similar spots where they're both those taller mids who haven't really developed themselves as those clear-cut best 22 long-term pieces. So I really want to see both of them respectively over the next year do that, because they're in that almost make or break stage in their careers where they've had those years on AFL list. Now it's time to really consolidate and make a spot theirs respectively. O'Halloran, obviously, he's been getting games quite regularly and he's been a reasonable piece. We'll have to see sort of whether he keeps developing and keeps improving. So we'll have to see there. And then for me here at the same pick, so I would have bid on Connor McFadden, who I think is actually probably going to come good with Brisbane, but we just have to sort of see him have a good run with injuries and get opportunities. Riley West, again, I would have bid on, but matched. And then again, Luke Valenti, who I've mentioned before in my previous part with Gold Coast. Ian Hill, so Bobby Hill, as you'd know him as. GWS actually moved up for this pick. I wouldn't have in the same position, but for me here, at least my best available was Noah Gown. So, and as you can see with these picks, I would have been pretty comfortable moving down as guys where I could figure pretty easily that, look, I don't need to use such a high pick for. But yeah, Noah Gown I really liked in both his draft year and even his first year for Essendon. I thought he was actually playing really good footy in the VFL, but he was just one where he was just cut far too early. And yeah, I don't agree with that thinking from Essendon at all. So I think they missed an opportunity there, and I really hope that Gown actually really continues with his footy and really goes hard to get drafted again. Because I think he's a pretty reasonable talent and really reads the game really well, capable mark, does a few things that I quite like. So you've got Kieran Briggs, so he's starting to come through. Maybe he becomes a long-term piece. We'll have to see. On my side, I had Sydney Stack here, so obviously a talent, but we'll have to see over the long run whether he fully fulfills it. Connor Iden, look, reasonable sort of role player in defence. For me, unexceptional and someone I'd almost prefer to replace, but I know a lot of GWS fans respect his game probably quite a bit more than I do. And then you've got Callum Brown here, who, as a Cat B rookie, look, I'm not going to put any Cat B rookies on my side, just because they're not prospects I scout. I don't follow other sports that sort of scout players direct to the AFL. So for me here, the other one I'd probably like to give special mention to is Mitch Pajaski. So he's a really good footballer in the VFL for those that aren't familiar, and as that sort of tall midfielder, he can go forward, strong mark, hit the scoreboard. So really that dual position type of around 191-ish. So I think he's got the scope potentially to be a piece at AFL level, but of course he has to get an opportunity. So obviously I hope he really keeps things up with his footy and really keeps working to keep getting better. And his younger brother as well as a ruckman almost got looked at sort of during the mid-season draft and was one of those rucks sort of on the radar as possible. So you've got a couple of brothers there that are pretty talented, it's fair to say. And then Mumford as pre-season supplemental period. Well, whenever you can bring Shane Mumford in, well, you do, because he makes the rest of the team stand taller. So that's a, needless to say, very obvious one. So, yeah, and of course, tremendous value there. So, better draft. Yeah, I'd be going Giants, sure. Just with the extra numbers, that really helps. Where if you've got a Valenti retired, a Gown who is an AFL listed, Pajaski who's still in the state leagues, it's hard to win out, and you've got the sheer numbers on AFL list for the Giants. So, not that I'm necessarily overly high on either of them, or sorry, any of them, but yeah, certainly the Giants get the points. Collier-Dawkins would have to develop big time to really make up that difference, and Stack would really have to become a very high level piece. So I've still got a chance, but yeah, I'd give the points to GWS for 2018. And again, you can see that improvement where you've got those more names for the Giants as well that make a difference. So 2019, so the key names of difference. So you've got Lockie Ash, who's become a pretty good piece. On my side, Sam Flanders, but of course for the Suns he hasn't really developed. So that's, for me at least, a frustration as someone who was picking him as a best available. Tom Green, for me, he was a clear top 3 player in this draft, and I thought it was ridiculous that he actually made it to pick 10. So by this stage, of course, with the bidding, it wasn't that you could wait until your next selection to actually get them. You'd actually have to match bids by basically moving up to match the points for that bid. So, so with Green, I really thought Raul, Anderson, Green, you can really draw a line through and pick them in any order. They're the top 3 players in this draft. So, I would have been ecstatic getting Green after that, I guess, pick 4, it's fair to say. Whether you'd want Ash or Flanders, well, I'd be taking Ash just because Flanders hasn't, at least to date, developed to the level I hope. Riccardi and Burns. So this is an interesting one. So Riccardi, really liked what he did early on, and what he was doing in the VFL actually for the first couple of rounds last year as a key defender. Just ridiculous, the intercept marks he was taking. So, and as a high flyer, strong marker who reads it so well, why did he not stay as a key defender? That makes no sense. Put him back as a key defender, please. Giants staff, you really need to do that. So, and I would have traded for him last off season if I could as well. So, I think his opportunity's honestly being wasted. I think he's a really good talent, and he's one of those where he showed that year-on-year improvement, where in his draft year, he wasn't anything. The next year he came back as an overager and really showed meaningful progress, and then he went to the VFL after that and was their rising star, so winning the Fothergill Round Mitchell medal. So, so he was one where that year-on-year improvement, but with the Giants, he just needs the opportunity in that really consistent run to build his confidence, and then I think he'll be a piece. But Ryan Burns, I'm really high on for the Saints. I think he's going to be a long-term midfielder for them, so watch his name, be aware of him, because I think he's a really good piece, and as per my reading here of having him at 18, I thought he was grossly underrated by clubs, so I'm expecting really this year for him to show people why, honestly. So other notables, you've got Stein and Sproul, nothing really to mention there. On my side, I've got Baker, so-called Bolton. So again, you've got the same names propping up. And Baker, again, I just really want to see get a chance. Bolton probably too old, but still would have been really great to have on an AFL list again. Winning side here, it's pretty well a draw, really. It's hard to sort of say. There's too many question marks. It's too early. So not sure. If Baker gets drafted, I think it'll probably go my way because I think he'll become a really good piece if he does get an opportunity at AFL level. But if you want to give the points to GWS for 2019, you can, given they've got more sort of existing AFL players, it's fair to say. So, we'll have to see there. But certainly those 4 in the national draft that are the bolded, it's really hard for me to pick between them. I like Ash to Flanders, but then Burns to Riccardi. So, and how I'd rate them, it's hard. Like, I almost prefer Burns to Flanders. So, it's hard to say. Okay, 2020. So this was a draft I really didn't like what the Giants did, and I think will, in hindsight, be a really disappointing draft, actually. So this is actually one where it probably comes down to drafting skill more so than actually the development stuff. So Tanner Bruhn, I actually agree with the Giants on this first one. But before I would have picked him, I would have bid on Lachie Jones, who, by the way, I think is going to become a star for Port Adelaide. So already really capable in defence, and I think he establishes himself as a regular this year. But then as you get a few midfield retirements and a few opportunities opening up there, I think he's going to be an absolute star through the midfield. So watch out for him. He's got that ball winning, he's got that explosive power to him. So he's really got the attributes to be a big time difference maker through there. And Arif McGuinness, look, tall midfielder with versatility and incredible athlete. But he's one where I've said all along, he's not going to be a year 1 ready player. But I think possibly this year we start to see him, and then probably year 3 he starts to come good. So watch out for his name for Collingwood. Obviously they would have matched bids as with Port Adelaide with Jones. So we've got Tanner Bruhn as that, again, common selection and the one I would have ended up with ultimately. Connor Stone, Ryan Angwin, as you can see by my ratings here, I just didn't see them as suitable for selection this early ultimately, where basically both of them are projects and not suitable for selection that early. And look, in fairness, you didn't have a NAB League season for them to show themselves. So, that sort of makes it a bit harder to pick. But on my side of the equation, I so much prefer my selections. And you can see by where I rated them. But Finlay Macrae, I'm expecting him to become a regular for Collingwood this year and become a pretty good piece. You're probably going to see him again mostly across sort of wing half forward, but I think we'll sort of slowly see him start to get some centre bounce opportunities, and probably year 3, so that'll be more 2023. I think you'll start to see him as a genuine sort of centre bounce attendance regular. So yeah, certainly watch for Finlay Macrae, and I'd probably say, although actually as a junior I would have said probably in his underage year he was quite a lot better than what Jack certainly was, but I'd say probably more so because he missed that draft year. I'd say probably a Finlay Macrae is probably a year behind Jack, so I'd probably say probably year 3 is that breakout year to watch for those that are fantasy and super coach people out there. Jack Carroll, I really like his game, and I really liked the improvement in the second half of the year in the VFL from him. So I think he's got the scope to be a good midfielder for Carlton. So Carlton fans, make sure you watch him. So I think you've got a piece that you might not know about quite yet, unless you follow the VFL. Jackson Callow, again, undrafted until mid-season draft. Had him top 20, really like him. Good to see him on an AFL list. And Jack Ginnivan, I liked what he did for Collingwood this year. So I'm watching him in the VFL, seeing what he did forward. He's got some talent. So I give him a chance to honestly be a piece. So he's another where, hey, watch out for this guy. So, and again, Fisher, undrafted, Ma, undrafted, and he could have been a chance for whether it's preseason supplemental period, mid-season draft. He was sort of on that radar. Which draft would I take? I would easily take 2020. I know it's too early, but yeah, I'm not at all convinced on the GWS names. I'm still very, very high on really all the names that I've taken here on my side. So up to you guys at home what you think. But yeah, I'm really very happy with my group from 2020. That's for sure. And then 2021. So Pete Ling, I respect his game. Solid mid-season draft pick. On my side, I still really like Callow, so we'll have to see over time how that goes. Finn Callaghan, look, it is a good sort of fit for the GWS midfield, where you've got all these sort of ball-winning mids. You don't really have that sort of classy mover through there. So that's what Finn Callaghan sort of represents there. So Lee Collier, I actually rated him as the guy I would have taken there, but if you go strictly from my power rankings, Matthew Johnson is the pick. But look, with GWS having so many midfielders, taking Callaghan before that, it's hard to see that path for a best 22 spot for Johnson, which is why I went with Lee Collier here. But yeah, it just depends how you want to rule it. So on ESPN, if you look at my first round draft review, I was actually complimenting GWS on saying, hey, Aaliyah, even though he's not my preferred player to Johnson, he's the one I would have also picked here. So, but we'll have to see how that goes. Johnson might be the better player long term, but we'll just have to see. And then with this one, so Josh Fahey, look, good pick here, and I rated him, but when you've got a Zach Taylor, who I think is the 12th best in the draft and is available at 42, and again, GWS don't need the midfielders, but Taylor is so good you just can't ignore. So what he was doing in that last roughly month in the NAB League, well, he was really doing damage. So just racking it up, he's got the skills, he's got the speed. I think Adelaide did really well here with this pick, even though obviously they've got too many small midfielders. They're far too small. But yeah, look, Taylor on value is just too hard to ignore. So, and I would have liked more picks in the 40s, honestly, so then I can get guys like Arlo Draper and a few others. But yeah, I'm just obviously not doing that for the purposes of this exercise. But yeah, look, we'll have to sort of see how the others go. Ditmar, I'd love to see drafted. And again, Bailey Rogers, I'd love to see drafted too. Better draft, we'll have to see. We haven't had the season yet, so we'll know in hindsight. Okay, so again, we're back to my best 22 versus the GWS best 22. So, yeah, so if you look through it, up to you what you decide. Again, I prefer my group, but this is certainly a lot closer than versus Gold Coast. So, and why that was the case with GWS, well, they're able to ultimately bring in more good established players from rival teams. So that was really a big catalyst towards helping them be the better team. And then, of course, after a few years, well, they brought in a Mumford, they brought in a Heath Shaw. So again, they're big difference makers and really helped support the development of a lot of the Giants. And again, you hopefully were able to sort of see throughout that both with Gold Coast and GWS respectively, they really did sort of show improvement with their drafting over the years. Not that every year's perfect, but you can sort of get a feel for that trend where certainly compared to my drafting, it was certainly much more equal, and I wasn't able to certainly blow them away as I did in those early years. So, and despite my personal improvement as well on my end. So, but yeah, hopefully you've had enough time looking at those. And then we've got a combined best 22. So unique to my team, I've got 13. Unique to GWS, we've got 8. And in both teams, we've got 5. So with the commonalities, well, it's either their academy picks, as with Steele and Hopper, or you've got really pick 1s in Patton and Whitfield, or a pick 2 in Cornelio. So really there wasn't all that much I had in common with GWS with their recruiting, interestingly. So a lot of my opinions, as you probably saw in going through the rankings, were actually really quite vastly different, honestly. So yeah, that's always interesting to see. So yeah, you guys can let me know in the comment section below whether you believe I beat out Gold Coast and whether I beat out GWS respectively, or whether you have a different opinion there on either club. So last but not least, so just jumping into some conclusions. So you can read this yourselves, but basically my personal opinion is that basically a lack of veteran leadership and established players and a lack of familiarity really hurt both clubs, particularly in those early years, as hopefully you've seen in sort of the comparisons between my own drafting and what both clubs did. And it leads to suboptimal results. Another point that I really wanted to make reference to, and this is probably more of a Gold Coast point than a GWS point, though both did sort of do a bit of this, but basically recycling, and also you'd notice it through the trade period, and you've got delisted free agency and all that, so it doesn't really come through the draft. But really one thing that I would be very conscious of is recycling players from opposition lists and redrafting players as rookies who have just been delisted further impacts hit rate. So and you've seen a lot of the recycled players with Gold Coast where, look, they just shouldn't really be there. And yeah, and ultimately, if you are sort of going that recycled player route, well, you want guys that really are those really obvious ones where they're just, as I'm saying here, no-brainer, clear-cut best 22 players. So the obvious examples, we've got Jared Lyons, who the Suns shouldn't have delisted, Hugh Greenwood, who, again, the Suns really shouldn't have delisted, and then you've got Brent Harvey as well, where prematurely retired by North Melbourne. He still wanted to go round. And interesting fact, so in Brett Harvey's last year, there was no player in the competition that had both more disposals and goals than him. So certainly in one or the other category, every player in the comp he would have pipped. So given that, it's really hard to sort of say he should have retired, particularly given his durability was still good. He was still covering the ground really well. His skills in terms of actually hitting targets and his kick rates, well, just really phenomenal. Everything there was really sort of suggesting, hey, this guy has another 2 years of really good footy in him. So, yeah, so they're the sort of players I'd be aware of. And obviously for the Suns, hey, don't delist guys like Lyons, who was the Suns' best midfielder, or a Hugh Greenwood, who, aside from Tuke Miller, was really, in my opinion at least, the next best midfielder for the Suns. So, yeah, they're the guys to go for. So if they're not clear-cut best 22 players, don't look at recycled players. That's the rule, or at least the one I would certainly suggest clubs abide by. And the other thing I'd also like to make mention of is with both clubs, there was a lack of state leaguers added in the mid, late, and rookie parts of the draft, which really hurt their results. So, and as you can see from my own drafting, I really, particularly in the rookie draft, but also sort of mid to late, I've got a lot higher of a leaning towards mature ages. And that's something where really ongoing into the future, I'm going to have an even heavier weighting towards mature ages, just because I understand that basically the hit rates with mature ages are dramatically higher. So when you really look through them and really look back at the history of all the drafts, if you do the calculations on each of the drafts, and for a future video, I'll actually really go through that in greater detail. But if you look through even some of my future videos where I'll be doing some of the draft redos, you'll really sort of pick up on that theme pretty quickly, where there were mature age options that were overlooked that would have been substantially better than the vast majority of the players who were drafted in the end. So yeah, there's some of the things to be aware of. So yeah, guys, let me know in the comments section below whether you think I outperformed both Gold Coast and GWS. Perhaps I should take over their recruiting departments, cut all the other staff, maybe create my own team around some of my own philosophies. But yeah, look, in reality, I just really want to bring back, I guess, the facts of, yeah, look, when you're a new club starting out, when everything's new, you're bringing in all these under 18s, it's not going to lead to results. So, in my opinion, there's at least two clubs I've outperformed over really the span of years from really, I guess, their inceptions. So, yeah, look, at least that's points and some credibility on my side to show that, hey, I actually do stack up in terms of my own drafting performances over the years. But ultimately, there is quite a lot that goes into it. So, and with my analysis, look, I've only gone through these two clubs. If you have any special requests for me to go through, whether it's particular drafts or particular clubs, I may sort of look into some of those scenarios. In going through this exercise, there probably are a few other clubs I have outperformed, even noting the facts that there'll be a lot of players that I've picked that have gone undrafted, meaning no opportunity at AFL level, and also a lot of repeat picks where year after year I'd be picking the same guys, saying, hey, these guys should be on an AFL list and really my preferred picks. So that's always sort of the handicap on my side, aside from not having a recruiting department to consult to help me maximize my selections. So but yeah, if you enjoy this video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future updates. And yeah, look out for my coming videos because yeah, I'm going to be doing some draft redos. So I'm looking at some top 15s for really, I guess, the drafts that I've covered over the years. So I'm looking at a span from basically 2009 onwards. So yeah, that's certainly something to look out for, and that'll generate, I'm sure, quite a lot of discussions. So that'll be a fun exercise, and look, particularly with the more recent drafts, it's so up in the air, it's still so early, that it's very much opinion with those, and with those, I guess, older drafts, so sort of your 2009, 2010, where most things are pretty well known, I'll have some interesting views, and there'll be a few sort of twists, I suppose, there as well that will create some interesting discussion, I'm sure. But anyway, guys, see you in the next video.